Blur mic. And can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
And can somebody help us monitor the chat?
Yes, we have
I can do
Maeve.
that. Yep.
Yeah, Maeve.
Maeve. Okay,
Yep.
great.
I'll send them over to you and we'll be good on questions.
And you can feel free to interrupt us, especially Tyler. Just interrupt him as much as you want.
Okay.
It doesn't even matter if you have a question or not. Just
Interrupt him.
Okay. Sounds good.
at the wrong light, you can actually see my thinning hair. That's not good. Well, no offense, sir. You look great.
Me neither.
Oh, I don't care about.
I'm not too far behind there.
All right. So will you have some opening remarks? Chief, are you gonna?
Yeah, so in a minute, we'll just give everybody another minute to log on, and then I'll just say a few quick words and just turn it right over to you, Thomas.
Great. Okay. I'll be right back.
Yep. All right, so I'll start it off. Good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for today's flood mitigation presentation. Our first speaker is Thomas Sung, FEMA specialist and renowned expert in resiliency and floodplain management. Our second speaker is Tyler Ardron, Vice President of Risk Reduction Plus Group, also a certified floodplain manager and a licensed insurance broker. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Thomas Sung and Tyler Ardron.
Good evening, everyone. Wow, what an introduction. I'm not sure if I can live up to that. So I really need to change my bio to maybe a mediocre or something a little bit lower to set that bar down. So look, I think we got a nice little small group here, and we can keep this very informal. So please, if you want to put something in the chat, you have a question, and in fact, we can give people a little bit more time. So if you can, please use the chat box to put in maybe some topics that you would like us to cover, some questions you may have, and so that while Tyler and I are speaking, we can kind of touch upon the things that are of most interest to you or that are really important. So please do that. And really, I'm just buying time so that I can find that chat box so I can see it as well. And then we'll have Maeve as well monitor the chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to in fact, I encourage you to put the questions in there, type it. And because this is really for you. I don't want to waste your time. We want to talk about the things that are most important to you. So again, this is your time as well as ours. We want to make the best of both. And look, and I appreciate the chief and everyone else who have asked Tyler and I to address you folks. This is a very important topic, and it's great to hear that there are people who are interested, because one of the things that FEMA really pushes for is we want to make sure people make informed decisions. That is the least that we can do as public servants, is to give you the information. And really, it comes down to you having to do certain things, but at the end, it is the action. You need to take that action. And what we see in the state of New Jersey and in other parts of the country, people are not taking the actions we want. We want people to have flood coverage because it is the #1 disaster. So anyway, I think I've bought a little bit of time. I see a few people in, so let me get right into it then. Look, if you're as old as I am, or you use words like back in the day or back when I was your age, well, then you should be old enough to remember these two symbols, right? But, late 80s, even the early 2000s, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, people were at the Blockbuster, right? They were renting those cassettes. They had a whole wall full of all these movies, and that's what people were doing. And probably in the middle of it, just like I'm thinking back of my days renting movies, you thought this would never change. And this was it. VHS tapes. We would watch videos, with the VCR players, and that just seemed so normal, and that seemed like that was the standard. But the world started changing, right? People started acting differently. And then you have a company like Netflix that had those little red envelopes. So they made it a little easier, but at the end of the day, you were still getting a DVD and watching it in your living room. But as the world was changing, one of these two companies took action, right? They saw this as an opportunity to not only change the way they did their business, but they took that action, they followed through, and now you have Netflix that is still around and Blockbuster that is out of business. And I want this to be kind of more of a lesson for all of us. During these times, during what we call at FEMA blue sky times, no storms, everything is great, the weather is nice, beautiful, no floods in sight. This is a time to take those actions because it won't always be like that. And I think we've seen in the news, and you've seen it in your state, these isolated rainstorms. There are little pockets of the state that are now flooding frequently. It is not these big Sandy-like or Irene-like events, but it is just these massive, these small storms that come in, dump a lot of rain in a short period of time, and then flood people. And they're caught unaware. And so we want people to understand what it is, why it's so important to have flood insurance. We often think of this as a kind of like a financial decision, right? People think it makes dollars or cents. Hey, I spend, $1,000 or $1,500 on insurance. What's my return? Well, how will I get my money back, or how will I get my value? And there's that part of it. But one of the things that does not get talked about enough, and this is something that Tyler sees with his clients, something that I and the chief and maybe some of you have seen, it's the emotional toll that happens after you get flooded. There was one day my parents, they had a little water in their basement. They called me up. I had a long day. I had to drive all the way to their house. I come down. I can smell that musky odor. I can step into the water, and just for a moment, I felt defeated. And now we were only talking about 4 or 5 inches of water. I can't imagine what some of you other folks, some of your neighbors, maybe some of your relatives, some of the people you may have known in other areas that have flooded severely. I can't even imagine what that's like. And that's only the beginning, right? That road to recovery is long. It is long and it is hard. And what makes it even worse is who's going to pay for all those repairs. And that is the one thing flood insurance can do. It's not gonna protect your home from ever flooding, but it will take a big component out of that recovery to alleviate some of that stress. You're not going out of pocket. You're able to use that insurance to pay for the repairs. And believe it or not, that will make a huge difference during a time when you may be at a very low point. One of the things people think is, hey, it's going to flood and FEMA's going to come in and they're just going to start cutting checks, right? What we call disaster assistance. I just wanted to dispel this myth. It does not happen very often, right? So I have a chart here. Now, since 2011, since Irene, there have been 4 times that disaster assistance was made available. One time was COVID, so that was not a flood event. So we had Irene and Sandy back to back. And then almost 10 years later, you had Ida. And while it did affect a lot of a huge part of the state, it didn't affect every area. So if you were unfortunate to be in those areas, or if you did flood and you got disaster assistance, that's great. I can tell you this, there are folks that were not in the disaster area that still flooded and they got no relief. And the other thing about disaster assistance, and this is a huge misunderstanding we get a lot, it is not meant to make you whole. Right? FEMA does not come in and say, hey, there was a huge storm and tell me your repair costs because we're going to pay for it. Disaster assistance is only meant as an emergency fund. It is there to make to help you make your home safe for you to go back, if that's even possible, to help you pay for some lost goods, to again, tide you over until the real work happens or is needed. And at that point, you either have insurance or you don't. And if you don't have insurance, you're going to wind up being out of pocket for a lot of those expenses. I want you to think, most of us, we buy a house, we get a 30-year mortgage, and we have dreams. In 30 years, I'm going to pay off my home and I'll be debt free. And the last thing you want is to get flooded, to have to pay for your own repairs. And if that doesn't break you, and you come to FEMA and they say, well, we can't give you any money, but you can get an SBA loan. And now you have to borrow money and add on to your debt. This could be very crushing. So again, we want you to make informed decisions. We want you to understand there not only what your risks are, if you live near the Pequannock or you live near the ocean, whatever it may be, or as we're learning now, do you live in a low-lying area so that when it does rain, when the storms come and dumps a lot of water in a short period of time, it all starts to accumulate near you? These are the things that you have to consider, because if you do not know this now, then let me be the first to tell you that homeowners insurance will not cover flood damage. I'm sure this is something Tyler will go over in a bit. Anybody have any questions on disaster assistance? And Maeve, I'm gonna rely on you because I still couldn't find the chat box.
We're working on enabling the Q&A feature.
Okay.
So we should be able to do it.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So while we're waiting, again, if you have questions, just keep them in mind, and we'll definitely have time to address them at the end. So one of the things about insurance, this is unfortunate, but you have to be your own advocate. You have to actually be part of the process. You have to learn what it is that you're covered for. This is really important. And if you have a great agent who can do that, that's awesome. And Tyler hates when I say this, because I say that we sometimes do these things together. And I always say, you pay your agents a commission and they make a residual off of you every year. Make them earn that money. Make them ask their questions. Have them give you that advice. I've been living in this house for 12 years. I don't know how many times I've spoken to my agent, but I'm pretty sure it's not enough. And so I've been making a more phone calls after the cost of raw goods went up. I was like, hey, if my house burns down, am I covered enough that I can actually rebuild? Because plywood now costs $50 instead of $2. And I don't want to get stuck out there, because when you don't know what you're paying for, right? If you don't know what you're covered for, when you need it the most, that's not when you want to find out that you were wrong or you didn't know any better. So ask those questions now. right? Just going back to that Blockbuster example, this is the time, this is the opportunity to get that information for yourself. Take those actions. And I just gave you this, and this is available online. We don't have to go over everything. Look, if you're like me, you get a new piece of information, something else has to kind of pop out of your brain. So I'm not going to inundate you with all the details here, but the key point is really understand what it is that what you're buying, what you're covered for. And this is very important that you have a great, you work with a very good broker, and don't ever feel bad asking them questions or having them explain stuff. Again, you pay them for this. Some of the older homes, I'm sure there are some homes in Millburn that have basements that are in a flood zone, and they may be grandfathered in for compliance reasons. But anyway, as far as the NFIP insurance is concerned, we have very limited coverage in basements. So again, understand what it is that you're buying if you decide to purchase flood insurance, or if you have it already, just know what it is that is covered. And I think Tyler he'll either touch upon it or he can answer any of those questions you may have. One thing, and sometimes this is kind of misleading because FEMA will refer to this as renter's insurance at times, but it's actually it's technically for contents only. And this is not a required flood insurance component. This is kind of an optional one. And what this will do is it'll basically do what it says. It covers the stuff inside your house. So if you have stuff inside your first floor that you think is valuable and that you want to protect financially to replace, this is your option to do so. If you rent a home or you rent an apartment, you're not responsible for the building, but no one's going to pay you for the stuff inside of it. So if that's stuff you want to protect financially, this is your option. One thing to understand as far as content is concerned, we'll do actual cost value. And that only means you buy a couch for $1,000 and that couch is 10 years old and it floods and you file a claim, you are not getting that $1,000 because that couch is no longer worth that $1,000. These are the little intricacies that really you need to talk to your agent and give them these scenarios. Hey, if this happens, how much do you think you'll pay me? Or what is covered for this? It's extremely important that you are informed so you understand what it is that you're either trying to protect or you are protected for. Cost is a big item. I get it. Insurance it's one of these weird things. You tell people, hey, spend your hard-earned money on something you do not ever want to use. Right? That is it sounds like the most difficult thing to ever sell. But the fact is you buy peace of mind. And this is going back to, thinking of what is it that you're protecting. And if you think about it, it's kind of like you're buying a shield for your assets. Right? You're kind of protecting your finances. We all know it's not cheap living in New Jersey, and it ain't cheap buying stuff to repair or to build out your home. We see the cost. Can you imagine if you got 2-3 feet of water inside your first floor, how much that would cost to get the plumber, to get the electrician, to get the contractor, to put all that stuff together? Not only is it for their labor, but the cost itself for the materials is extremely high. If you want to go through that and pay out of pocket and take that risk, that's one thing. But again, if you have insurance, at least you'll have that part of it covered. So there's some other myths, and we get this a lot. And we hear from people, I try to buy flood insurance, and the agent said, I can't buy it because I don't live in a flood zone. That is false. The NFIP will sell an insurance policy to almost anyone. And the exclusions are very minor. You can't have a house over water. You can't live in a protected area, what we call the coastal barrier resource system. it's again, it's sometimes you really not only have to shop for the best policy, but you have to shop for the best agent. So make sure you're working with somebody who deserves the money you're going to pay them for the advice and for the products that they're going to give you. Another thing people talk about is renter's insurance. Again, I think I just covered that. And the other thing is if your house is flooded in the past, again, the NFIP will cover that. There may be other private insurers who may not do that, but that's a question, again, between you and your agent. And when we talk about the private policies or private insurers, that is an option, right? I am not here to tell you just buy NFIP insurance. Buy whatever you think you need to make sure that you're covered. And if cost is that driving factor and you find a cheaper policy, that's great. Just make sure you know what you're buying. Make sure you're working with a good agent. I'm just going to keep saying that time and time again because I can't tell you how important that is. Okay. All right. Miriam, did the chat go up? The Q&A box go up, or are we still working on that?
What we're going to do, since it's a bit of a smaller group, is we're just going to have people raise hands either throughout or at the end and just pipe in, if that's okay.
No, perfect. So I've already said a lot. Anyone have any questions, comments, hands up? Please go off mute. Okay. Well, either I'm doing a great job or some of you are sleeping, just walked away. So, and that's why the cameras are not. Look, I no feelings hurt. I've put a lot of people to sleep in the past. Increased cost of compliance, ICC. Now, this is kind of I hope you never have to use this, but it does bear it is worth kind of mentioning. So every NFIP policy, you're paying a little bit into what we call ICC. And what happens is that if your house is ever considered substantially damaged, which is the cost of repairs is greater than 50% of the market value of the house, not the whole property, just the house, you would be considered what we call substantially damaged. If you have an older home, a home that is not up to code, you will then be required by the community to bring that building up to code. So whether it's filling in a basement and putting flood vents in this now new makeshift crawl space, or elevating your home, that is what you would be required to do. To help with that, the ICC, when you have that letter of substantial damage, you can submit it to your insurance agent, and you can get up to $30,000 in additional money to help you mitigate your property. It's a very small thing. And again, I hope none of you have to ever use it, but know that it is there. And going back to the private insurers, some of them may have a version of this, some of them don't. You got to ask that question. Hey, if my house gets wiped off and I have to build a new home and I have to bring it, I have to elevate it, make sure it's elevated, will my insurance policy pay for some of it and whatnot? ICC, however you want to frame it, but ask those questions because it's really important. As far as our coverage limits, that has not changed. For individual residents, the maximum you can buy is up to $250,000. My understanding is there are private insurers that will go higher. For some of you who may have higher value homes, I have heard of people getting the first $250,000 from the NFIP and then buying a supplemental to kind of make up the gap difference, whatever it may be. As far as contents is concerned, we'll go up to $100,000. If you have commercial buildings, if that is $500,000 is the cap. So, and if you have questions, again, it's something that really either talk to your agent or you can send our way to FEMA and we can give you some answers, or we can send you some more information on it. In this slide, we talk about higher deductibles to lower your costs, and I think Tyler will touch upon this a little bit more. That's not necessarily the case anymore, at least in my experience, and I know Tyler has seen a lot more. I have not seen a lot of savings from going to like a $5,000 deductible to a $10,000 deductible. Again, that is something you need to talk to your agent. But when it comes to deductibles and policies, you also need to talk to your lender. Because the next slide here, I'm going to talk about what is required. If your home is in a flood zone and you have a mortgage with any federal backing, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, you would be required to get flood insurance. Off the record, I don't think there's a lender in this country that will lend you money and not require flood insurance if you live in a flood zone. Right? It is a terrible proposition for them. You flood, you walk away, they get stuck holding the bag. That's something banks do not want to do. So I would say, unofficially speaking, if your house is in a flood zone and you have a mortgage, your lender's going to require you to get flood insurance. Now, just to give you the complete picture here, the requirement is really to cover your loan amount. So if you owe $50,000, your requirement is really to cover that $50,000 in flood insurance. That will lower your costs for your premium, but it must be said that obviously if you flood and the damages are greater than 50 or whatever that limit is, you will be out of pocket for the rest of it. So that is something to consider. But again, to be fully transparent, if cost is really a driving factor and your mortgage amount or the amount you owe is lower, is a relatively low amount, you can do that. If you buy a house, or if you don't have flood coverage and your lender requires it, they'll send a letter in the mail. You'll have 45 days to act, and legally they have the right to buy you a flood policy and just make you pay for it. It's called forced place purchase, but hopefully you'll never get there. Private insurance, as far as we're concerned, we want you to be insured, but you need to check with your agent, your lender. You need to make sure that whatever policy you're looking to buy will meet their needs. So I've heard of some lenders that don't accept a $10,000 deductible. So again, you got to go in. Unfortunately, you got to do some legwork. You need to make sure that the lender, whichever insurance policy you're looking at, the lender would accept that. Elevation certificates, really it's an official document that kind of shows how your house is structured, the height of your first floor. All new buildings will be requiring it. The older ones, there is a section in the new elevation certificate that you can kind of self-certify, or you can fill out yourself. That will only be for insurance purposes. Currently, we're only concerned with how high your first floor is, or your main floor is, relative to the ground. If any of you were familiar with flood insurance or the flood maps in the past, we were talking about base flood elevations. All that went out the window. The current way of rating a policy, we use a lot of different factors. The flood maps have nothing to do with how we price a policy, but the flood maps still show whether you're in or out, and the mandatory insurance purchase requirement is still in effect. So that is the only thing that these flood maps serve as far as insurance is concerned. It will not dictate how much you pay. It will only dictate whether you have to have it or not. And on the side note, those maps also help the community regulate construction, but that's probably for another time. And maps can be changed at any time, right? So I don't want you to think that, hey, I got to wait for FEMA to come and update my maps. They could be updated anytime. All we ask is that you provide technical information to prove that. And when it comes to individual homes, all we require, and this is the diagram, and again, you can Google most of this. Chief, I don't know if we're sharing our slide deck, but I'd be happy to give you a lot of these links for a lot of these infographics or flyers. But what you need to prove is that your ground level goes up to a certain height, but the ground is higher than that flood level. Well, that water would never touch the house. And because of that, you would be eligible to get what we call a letter of map amendment. It is an official document that basically says your property or your home is no longer in a special flood hazard area. Now, I want to go back to how this relates to insurance. That only means if you were once required to get flood insurance, you would not be required anymore. If you continue to keep your flood policy, that would not change. You would continue to pay the same amount. So again, maps do not affect the price, just affects whether or not you have to buy it. You have to have insurance or not. Affordability, it's been a big topic. This is something that the agency does not take for granted. We understand that flood insurance can be a burden, and it is something that we've been working on. This is something that our headquarters folks have been working on with Congress. They actually did some proposals on changing the way flood insurance, our standard flood insurance policy. There are some elements of it that are meant to reduce costs. Because we're going through this official process, me as a federal employee, I'm very limited in what I can say. So I would strongly encourage you to go online. If you Google changes to NFIP flood insurance, I'm sure you can find it. We're in the public comment period, but they are proposing some changes that can affect the price. And, it is something that, again, it's response to what people want or people need. Unfortunately, just as a big federal agency working with Congress, things just happen to move very slow. But we are thinking about it and we are trying. And then there are nonprofits and a lot of third parties, a lot of organizations that are advocates for communities to make sure that they get information on how they could mitigate their risk or reduce it. ASFPM is one of them. You have a New Jersey chapter, the New Jersey Floodplain Managers Association. They've got some great resources. Just see what you can find out there, be informed, and hopefully you make the decisions that will protect you financially. And again, it'll just be one less thing that you would have to worry about if something unfortunate happens. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop. And Tyler, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I will hand this over to you, and I will stay until the end to take any questions.
Awesome. All right, let me get my screen up here. All right, so you should see my slides, right? Hopefully.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Chief. So first just want to thank the Township of Millburn and Chief for having us. So like Tom said, my name's Tyler Ardren. I'm the Vice President of Risk Reduction Plus Group. We're also floodproofing.com. And really what I wanted to go over today is ways you can help reduce your flood insurance costs, how we can help you do that. While also reducing your flood risk. So Tom touched on a lot of the points on the insurance side. I'll also be diving into a little bit about that as well. And if there are any questions specific to insurance, like Tom said, please feel free to raise your hand, or I guess there's no Q&A box, but just raise your hand and we can just, ask them live. So just a little bit about us. We've been in business now 20 plus years promoting sound floodplain management. All of my staff, including myself, are certified floodplain managers as well as licensed insurance agents. So we're really able to bridge that gap between how to build properly in flood zones and how that translates to flood insurance costs. We do outreaches just like this all across the country. And on average, we have an 83% savings track record when we're reviewing someone's flood insurance. So Tom really nailed this in going into the flood statistics, but flooding is the #1 natural disaster in the U.S. And in fact, all 50 states have experienced floods in the past 5 years. He went into, just the constant rain It's been happening more and more, especially here in New Jersey. Just to give you an idea on the homeowners insurance side, a lot of homeowners insurance carriers have stopped writing new business in New Jersey. Or if they are writing business, the rates have gone up pretty dramatically. So that's on the homeowner side of things. It's getting a lot tougher. I'm having conversations daily on people's homeowners insurance specifically, just because it's getting tougher to find coverage. And when we do find coverage, it's a lot more expensive than it previously was. And that's because there's been more claims really in the history of New Jersey in these past 3 years. So that's kind of just a testament to, what it's been like here in the state from a loss standpoint. And, it's only getting worse from what I've seen. For those who have experience with Florida, maybe you have a house in Florida or relatives in Florida, their insurance market is very tough as well. And I've been doing this now for going on 13 years, and they weren't always like that. But when it started, it kind of is similar to how it's getting here in New Jersey from a risk standpoint. So, all that's to say, flooding happens everywhere. It's the biggest peril that claims are paid out on. And some stats here: Hurricane Harvey down in Houston, going on, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago now. 70% of the losses were outside of flood zones. So they weren't in those A or V zones. And I'll talk about what those zones are here shortly. But 20% of the NFIP claims are mid to low risk areas. And unfortunately, 94% of Americans do not have flood insurance. So just some basic definitions of stuff you may have heard of, or if not, you should be aware of if you are in a flood zone. We have your base flood elevation level. That's your BFE. That's the calculated level that FEMA estimates water will rise to during a flood event. And now, with that BFE, it's not, say your BFE is 8 foot, it's not 8 foot up in the air, it's 8 foot from mean sea level. For example, in the middle of the country, it might be 300, the BFE. That doesn't mean 300 feet in the air. That's just because their ground elevation is a lot higher, in the middle of the country as opposed to here where we're, pretty much at sea level. The community rating system, that's the CRS program. What that is the town joins that and in going above and beyond the normal NFIP codes and regulations and everything. And in doing so, benefits the community by giving them a discount on their flood insurance. Puts them into a class system. The lower the class, the bigger the discount. Doing things like this outreach gets them points for the CRS program. And it's a lot of work on the back end for the town officials and everybody working on the town side to get, the residents that discount. And then freeboard is elevating a building's floor higher than that BFE for a lower premium because they're, at less of a risk. So we have your flood zones here. Your A and V zones, they're going to be your special flood hazard areas where if you do have a federally backed mortgage, like Tom was talking about, you are required to have flood insurance. Some of the other zones that you might see, X zones, they're your low risk zones where a bank's not going to require flood insurance. But like Tom said, homeowners insurance does not cover the peril of flooding. I can tell you now, just because of how long I've been doing it, this is a conversation that we have, my staff, with every client that we do, because we, do all lines of insurance. And still, just last year or 2 years ago, when we got a lot of that rain in August, and flooding and everything throughout the state, I had probably 100 plus people trying to put in homeowners insurance claims for flooding. And, unfortunately, they did not have flood insurance. When we're working with clients, we make sure that they sign a waiver of flood insurance for every single homeowners policy we do. They could be in the middle of the country where, I get told this a lot. You would need an ARC. If their house floods, you're going to need an ARC for the rest of the country. But you'd be surprised about all those houses that do actually flood. But those types of houses, we still have them sign a waiver saying that they do not want flood insurance, because if they do actually flood, it's not going to be covered under homeowners insurance. So 3 solutions that I'm looking to do, or my staff's looking to do, when saving somebody off flood insurance and while we are doing a review. Number 1 is mitigating to compliance. So that's doing something to the structure that's going to reduce the risk, thus lower the flood insurance premium. Really, that's number 1, because not only are we lowering flood insurance costs that way, but we're also lowering the risk and chance of a substantial claim. And, more than just that claim, when someone floods, the process is very long, strenuous, stressful. And, that's what we're really trying to prevent. Like Tom said, flood insurance is a safety net. It's meant to bring you back to whole, but that process is not fun at all. I've been through it now with multiple big storms. Oh, do we have a question? I don't think so. I think maybe we need to
Dave, can you
There we go. All right. So yeah, just with claims, it's a very stressful time for people going through it. It can take months and months, and sadly during Superstorm Sandy, I had clients that took years to get back into their home. So we want to protect that home and make sure that there isn't a substantial claim. Number 2 is correctly rating somebody. Tom really hit the nail on the head with this one, in that, don't shop flood insurance rates, shop flood insurance knowledge. So, most people think that no matter where you go, if you're getting NFIP flood insurance or FEMA flood insurance, as you might have heard in the past, that it should be the same no matter where you go. Technically, if you're doing an NFIP policy, it should be the same no matter where you go, but it does fall on the agent's shoulders to properly rate you. So if the agent doesn't do a ton of flood insurance, if they're not educated on it, it's something that literally changes multiple times a year. If they're not educated on it, they could unfortunately misrate you, and you could potentially be paying thousands of dollars more than you should be on your flood insurance. That's one way that we're able to save people with flood insurance pretty much weekly. And then number 3 is private flood insurance. Private flood insurance is another option that's out there. It's gotten big, probably going on now 7 to 10 years ago. It really started getting bigger. And what they're doing is they're assessing risk on their own. They're private companies that are offering flood insurance. They're assessing risk based off their underwriting requirements and criteria. And what they're doing is they're accepting and declining properties. So they're taking on the risk that they do want to take on, and not taking on the risk they don't want to take on. But typically the risk they do want to take on can be upwards of 20 to 50% cheaper than the National Flood Insurance Program. Now, there are negatives, though, with private flood insurance. Actually all private flood insurance carriers that are out there are accepted by lenders. That was a thing about 2 years ago with FHA, where they wouldn't accept private flood insurance. That wasn't because the coverage was worse or anything like that. That was because the FHA guidelines did not have the wording correct. They defined it in the guidelines as National Flood Insurance Program flood insurance. So since then, they got rid of the National Flood Insurance Program and just kept it flood insurance. So FHA does accept private flood insurance currently, but if you do have private flood insurance, you're not eligible for grants or anything like that. You have to have an NFIP policy to be eligible for grants. What grants are is typically if we do get hit with a big hurricane or a big storm that affects a lot of people, and your home is, say, substantially damaged, where it's a full loss, you may be eligible for a grant that could bring you up to current flood code, like elevating the building or things like that. But if you have a private flood insurance policy, it's not going to, you're not going to be able to do so. Also with private flood insurance, you can get more coverage, like Tom hit on. I have carriers that'll go up to 10, 15, $20 million in coverage. Now, the only thing with private flood insurance, another negative, is that typically after a claim, and like I said, I've been doing this for 13 years. Everyone that was deemed a flood event, the claim was paid out, but every single one of those at renewal got dropped. So what that means is we have to bring you back to the National Flood Insurance Program. And when we do that, it's looked at as not continuous coverage or a lapse, and you have to go up to whatever the current rate is with the National Flood Insurance Program. And what that means is if you have a current National Flood Insurance Program policy, you might be subsidized to where you're going to gradually increase on the glide path around 15 to 18% a year until you hit whatever that actual risk rate is. But if you go to if you go back to the NFIP, you no longer have those subsidized rates, and you have to go right up to whatever that actual risk rate is. So mitigation saves $6 for every $1 invested. This is kind of just the stats behind mitigation, but when you put that money up front, the hope or the goal is that when there is a storm, you save that money on the back end. And this kind of just shows you what those numbers are. So wet floodproofing, it's required for residential structures. So residential structures now being built in those A and V zones are required to have proper flood openings. What wet floodproofing is you're allowing that water to pass through an unfinished space. What it does is it reduces the hydrostatic pressure that's built up on the foundation walls and allows it to pass through. And I'll give you some visuals to better understand that. But raising mechanicals above the flood level and then having those flood openings. So here's an example of one of those flood vents. You can see what happens. It opens up and it allows that water to flow through. But what we're trying to do is reduce the hydrostatic pressure. So when floodwaters come, they bring lateral forces, and those lateral forces push up on the foundation wall. So rather than resist that pressure, we want to relieve it by allowing it to flow through, equalizing it on both sides of that foundation wall. Now, these do have to go into an unfinished area. It can't be into a finished space, and it has to be an at-grade space. So you can't be putting them in your basement because it's just going to pool your basement. It has to be at grade, like you see here on the ground levels, at the same on both sides. And then you're allowing that water to flow through. But that's what we're trying to prevent, right? Hydrostatic pressure damage, foundation damage. These are very big losses that we want to avoid. So here's just some of the basics, but it has to automatically allow water to pass through in and out. It has to be bi-directional, meaning the water has to flow in, flow out, and it relieves the pressure rather than resists it. So for anyone who has commercial buildings in the area, I'm not sure if we do have any business owners that have buildings in the area, but another thing that you can do is called dry floodproofing. So I talked about wet floodproofing previously, and that's required for residential structures. But for commercial structures, you're able to dry floodproof the building. And here's just some examples of that, deployable systems that are out there. These are custom flood panels, stop logs, planks. What you're doing is basically blocking egress areas, windows, doorways, everything like that. Here's another point of use systems. We have flood-proof doors. And here's just some other options that are out there as well. And then perimeter systems, going around the perimeter of the structure, again, preventing water to go up against that building. So moving on to the case studies here. So this is a home that's in Ocean City, New Jersey. For those familiar with Ocean City, it's a barrier island. This was in an X zone, which is pretty crazy being it is on a barrier island. But the home was built in 2006, two-story home, 3,500 square feet. Now, previously, the NFIP about 3 years ago offered what they called preferred risk policies. And preferred risk policies were for people that were in low risk areas like X zones, and they were super cheap, $500 or less. Unfortunately, they did away with that with risk rating 2.0. And in doing so, from what I've seen, X zones have been a lot more expensive. But there are private carriers that are out there that are willing to give a chance to these low risk homes and, do it for relatively inexpensive. So here was an example of that Ocean City house where they were paying $2,700 for an X zone quote. They were paying $405 with the PRP, but we switched them to private. We were able to lower them down $700 to $738, which was a 73% reduction, $1,900 savings in that first year. And remember, 80% of properties flooded during Hurricane Harvey were in these X zones. So when a flood comes, Mother Nature is not just looking at the FEMA maps and saying, oh, it's an X zone, the water stop, right? It's the water's going where it wants to go. And I keep harping on it, but homeowners insurance doesn't cover flood damage. Now, homeowners will cover, inside the home from a flooding standpoint. And what I mean by that is like a pipe burst or something like that. That is covered under homeowners insurance, but rising water from the outside, that's not covered under homeowners insurance. You do need a flood insurance policy to cover that peril. Now, here's just another case. This is in Dumont, New Jersey. This is a home with a basement. It was their primary home, built in 1950. They were paying $3,900. And we were actually able to move them to a different carrier and lower them down to $942, which was a 76% reduction. We also were able to reduce their deductible from $5K down to $2K. So now if there is a loss, they don't have to take that $5K off the coverage. They can, they only have $2K. And also with these different companies that are out there, they also offer additional coverages that the NFIP doesn't offer. So some examples for this one, we added $25K in other structures coverage it's going to cover sheds, fencing, things like that. Personal property is covered under the NFIP, but loss of use coverage, $50,000. So if there is a substantial claim and they have to live in a hotel or they have to, rent a apartment or something for a year, that coverage is going to pick that up. And then also this carrier offers basement personal property coverage. And that's something that the NFIP doesn't cover from a personal property standpoint. Anything under the first living floor from a personal property standpoint that is not covered under the NFIP. So that's just, some knowledge on the personal property. Don't put high value personal property storage under that first living floor. Make sure that's all up in the first living floor or higher, or make sure that you're covered if you do have those types of items down in your basement or crawl space or whatever. So that's pretty much it for my side of the presentation. Some other things that I did want to touch on from the insurance end of things, with the National Flood Insurance Program specifically. The rates have recently changed, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier with risk rating 2.0. But previously, with risk rating 1.0, the way that they rated properties was pretty much solely built on elevation difference. So how high the level of your home is compared to that base flood elevation level that I gave the net definition for earlier. But now with risk rating 2.0, it's looking at a lot of other factors like the replacement cost, distance to flooding, type of flooding, and a lot more other factors, really comparing that to other insurance markets, because that's how they're all done. For example, auto insurance is not just looking at, the age of the driver. They're looking at area, how many drivers are in that area, what type of vehicle you're driving. And, what I guess I'm trying to say is it's a lot more specific to your case. So like my auto insurance is 100% going to be a different rate than every single person on this call. And really flood insurance is trying to mirror that by taking all this data and, assessing the risk and determining what that rate's going to be. So that's risk rating 2.0. That just came out, like I said, in 2021. And then 2022, it was effective for, everyone in the program. So that's something that's pretty recent that has changed. You may have seen, if you do have a current policy, you may have seen it affect your policy. What they're doing is with these rates, they're getting new actual risk rates. And if your actual risk rate is higher or was higher than what you were previously paying, then you're going to be on that glide path that I referred to earlier, where you're going to increase around 15 to 18% a year at renewal until you hit whatever that new actual risk rate is. And now, which is cool, with the FEMA Clear Communication Act, you're actually able to see what your actual risk rate is on your declaration page. So if you look at your declaration page and you see FEMA full risk rate or FEMA actual risk rate, whatever that number is, that's where you're going to potentially increase to. And I say potentially because these rates do change annually. So that number might be different in a couple of years, but as it stands, that's the actual risk rate for your structure. And that's something to look at on your policy. But yeah, I mean, that's the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions, feel free to step in, and I'd be happy to answer them. And I know Tom would as well.
We have one hand raised.
Awesome. I'll end my screen in case someone wants to show themselves on the camera. Alexander, it looks like. Oh,
Yeah. Hey guys, thank you so much for this presentation. This is Alex McDonald. I'm the business administrator for the township. I just had a quick question when it came to the grants received when you have NFIP insurance. Once that grant is administered, we have a few homes in town that are looking are in the process of getting home elevation grants.
Yep.
Once that grant is received, are you able to switch from NFIP to private, or do you have to maintain that insurance for some time?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Tom. You can cover that.
Yeah, so Alexander, depending on which grant, but I think with New Jersey OEM, you have to buy an NFIP policy.
Yeah,
and it is in perpetuity.
It gets attached to the deed, I'm pretty sure, right, Tom?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it has to be
it is
NFIP.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you.
And Alexander, while you bring this up, so one of the things we've been wrestling with is we want to ensure that people who are elevating their homes maximize the insurance benefit while staying compliant. So there are designs that homes could that you can use to really lower the cost of insurance. And for example, the foundation that will give you the best insurance rate, or at least that factor of your insurance policy, is to build on post piles or piers, right? Like those beach homes. You see the beach homes, the waves go right underneath the water. Well, nobody ever thought about doing that in a riverine area. But actually, think about this concept, right? The less surface area water has to touch or to push against, the lower the risk, the less of a claim that you're going to make, less of a premium. So we strongly suggest, if it is possible, you go on post piles and piers. Now, some communities have an ordinance. You can't have an open foundation. So can you put lattice? Can you put breakaway walls? Can you get creative to meet the building code requirements, but still have the ideal design, or using the right material, stone instead of wood, for your foundation, so that you can maximize that insurance benefit, right? Tyler, would you add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think you hit on it. And also, what I spoke to about all the mitigation that's out there too, with floodproofing and everything.
I have a question, sorry.
Yes, please.
Just piggybacking off of Alex's question. We're one of the homes that are hoping to get the elevation grant.
Okay.
So one of the things that we had to do in order to apply for this was get quotes, right? And the problem that I was finding was that houses in this area don't typically get these elevations. So we had a lot of problems trying to find a contractor to give us a quote, because none of them would actually do the work. I mean, we got people that would raise the house, but none of the contractors would put the house back together. So, I mean, I love to hear like all the different options that you're talking about, but do you guys work with anyone in this area that we could, maybe you guys have a list we could reach out to? Because I'm afraid that hopefully, knock on wood, we'll get the grant, but then we don't really know what our options are. And the architects around here, they're not used to dealing with this sort of thing. And the people that we're going to find as contractors, they're also not used to it. So we're kind of just stuck with the only contractor that we could find right now.
Yeah,
Right,
I may have
Todd.
a company that that will go up where you guys are. I just have to. I'm not sure if they will or won't, so I'll reach out to them. Maybe I'll put my. Or there's no chat, is there? Is there chat?
There's
I
a
guess
chat, but we
maybe.
can put out your contact info.
Okay, perfect. And then
You're
Kim, if
welcome.
you can email me,
Okay.
I have a company that specializes in elevating homes. They've did it a ton after Super Sandy. I just, like I said, I don't know if they'll go up to you guys, but I'll reach out to them and find out.
Okay, great. Yeah, because we found a lot that would lift the home. It's just after it's lifted, someone that will put it back
They'll be
together.
if they do go up there, they'll be able to work with you on all of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and Kimberly, that's an excellent question. And um, again, unfortunately, it just doesn't stop. You have to continue doing that legwork. Work with your agent. Make sure you know what you're getting into, right? If you have a specific design, how high your first floor is going to be, whatever it is that you're planning on doing, make sure you know what you're getting into when you have to buy that flood insurance policy. Because the last thing I would hate for you to have happen is that you do all this, you make a huge investment, and all of a sudden your insurance is still, it's not as cheap as you thought it was going to be. So while you're in this planning phase, make sure you speak with all the experts and get the right advice.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Thanks.
Can I ask you guys to let us all know where the recording will be saved?
The recording will be on the township YouTube, and it should also be on the website.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Kelly, any questions? I mean, is there anything that you think you might have missed? We'd be happy to kind of go back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was super late to join.
That's okay.
I'm actually part of the Ridgewood Greenwood easement discussion. Sorry, my kids are in the background.
That's
And
okay.
I don't know if it was discussed at the beginning of the meeting, but just wanted to understand what the update was on that.
So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I'll jump in on that. So this presentation is more about flood resiliency and the insurance aspect when it comes to flooding. We had sent out letters to those residents in the Greenwood Ridgewood area to discuss those that are going to be impacted. And Kelly, I'm not sure if you're one of them, that would the township would require an easement from to put in the improved drainage. So we're waiting on some responses from any residents that did receive those letters. Also, we'll follow up next week to set up a meeting and hopefully capture as many people as we can that would want to discuss what all of that means. But we're moving forward. We've got the survey done. We've got the project area. We know the easements that we need to have in order to move forward with the project. So that's sort of where everything is at this point.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, because we got the original letter back, I guess it was last September. And then we knew some of our neighbors had some updates with maybe 2 families holding out. So we didn't know if our specific property was going to be affected or not, or like just even what the status was if other neighbors have already been reached out. But that's good that you got the survey. That's positive.
Yeah, and if you didn't receive a letter, then your property is not
Okay.
not required to have an easement at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I would like to know something about wet flood proofing because I asked my plumber to come in and take a look, and he said that it wasn't possible with the height of my basement. So what are the limitations on wet flood proofing? I really do want to raise my mechanicals, but I'm told that that's not likely.
Yeah, so wet flood proofing would be, like you said, raising your mechanicals, putting flood openings into the foundation. But if you do have a basement, it's not going to be possible. It has to be an at-grade space, like a crawl space, or a full height enclosure. As for raising the mechanicals, I mean, I think it's always doable. I guess it just kind of depends on your scenario of where they need to run all the lines and all that stuff. But I will say, and just being fully transparent, if you are only doing this for flood insurance savings, I would speak with an agent or, myself. I can give you an example of what your insurance would be if you were to do that. But before doing that, I definitely recommend, before doing the, elevating of the mechanicals, I definitely recommend speaking to an agent. If the reason you are doing it is for insurance, just to, make sure that it's to the savings that, you're willing to do it for. Or were
I,
you?
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I have flood insurance and I have had it since Hurricane Irene. And so I think that's going back almost 13 years.
Yeah.
So my flood insurance is actually lower than most people's. So I'm not looking to do it for flood insurance savings.
That's great.
It's more for the value of my home and the fact that I don't want to experience a similar flood.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And Sarah, I think that's an excellent example because I want to go back to this whole what you're protecting, right? And I think Tyler was trying to be very tactful in front of me saying, yeah, that's something FEMA says, but you really save no money. And you may not save a lot of money, but how much is it worth to you that if think of the big storms that we've had, Sandy and Irene happened late in the year. I think both times, like a week after, like it got frigid and you don't have heat or hot water and nobody has a boiler in stock. You can't find a plumber. Every good plumber is 8 to 12 months, booked. And you can't trust a guy who says, yeah, I can come next week. How much is it worth to you that you don't even have to go through that, right? That your boiler or your hot water heater, whatever it is high enough that it didn't get wet or it didn't get destroyed, that it has to be replaced. There's a value to that because it might cost $10,000 to replace it, and great, your insurance paid for it. Good luck finding it. How long do you have to wait until you get it, and how long do you have to wait to get it installed? So I know we like to think about money, and I think, Sarah, you're right on the point right there. If you're every time you hear the news say it's going to be a bad storm tomorrow, and you can't sleep because you're worried that your basement's going to maybe get 3 or 4 feet of water. If you didn't have to worry about that, how much is that relief worth to you? So these are the decisions that each of you needs to make on your own. But please be informed. It's not just about the money. There's a lot of stress factors, and sometimes there's a premium for peace of mind. And if you do it and you could avoid it, I'm telling you, it's something that I see in disasters that the stories are heartbreaking. And I would love not to hear these stories. And every once in a while, you get somebody who says, oh, yeah, I mitigated from the last storm and I got no water in my house, or I didn't have to replace my boiler and I had heat and hot water. And those are the good stories, but they're so few and far between. So again, please just think about these decisions. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about just avoiding the emotional strain, the trauma that these things cause, because it's not easy.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Sarah.
Hi, this is Miriam. I want to project ahead a little bit and maybe tie in the new law that was passed on flood risk disclosure.
Yes.
I believe it was just passed last month in March. Can you speak on this, or can you summarize what it means, looking ahead?
Yeah. You want me to go, Tom? Is that cool?
Yeah, no, please.
Okay. Yeah. And only because I present to realtors weekly, and it's huge for them. So now it's required for in the seller disclosures that the seller has to report on flood specific questions, like did they ever have a flood did they ever flood loss? Are they in a flood zone? All these things that are critical when purchasing a home. And it's a required by law that the seller has to fill that out. And it's important because with homeowners insurance, I, as an insurance agent, run what's called a clue report. And what that does is it tells me all the claims that the homeowner on that house has made from the homeowners insurance the past around 7 years. For auto, same thing. Homeowners insurance, the claims follow the house, whereas auto insurance, it follows the driver, obviously not the vehicle. But flood specifically does not have a central reporting system. So me as an agent has to ask, did you ever have a flood claim? And I'll, flip it to auto insurance. I'll tell you every single time I ask that, I get told no. And you'd be shocked at how many times when I run that report, how many DUIs and crazy stuff I've seen. So I think people think they're, trying to get a better rate by not telling me. But on the other insurances, I find out. With flood, I do not find out unless the person tells me. So that same goes for a buyer, who's purchasing a home. Before, they weren't told this information at all. Now it's required by law that the seller has to report this information. Also, it goes for landlords, has to report it to renters. Very similar information, just a few less questions. But they have to report it to renters because, a renter signs a lease, say for a year, they flood 3 months in. That's probably something that they want to know, has that house ever flooded in the past? It's something they might want to know because maybe they don't want to, be in that situation ever. And same goes for, a buyer that's purchasing a home. When you're purchasing a home, typically that's the biggest purchase you'll ever make for most people. And when you're doing it, you're doing all your due diligence. You're looking at the roof age. You have an inspector out, all these different things to make sure that you're making a good purchase and a purchase that, you're going to be happy with 20, 30 years down the line. And not previous to this disclosure, not having that information was bad. I've been through scenarios where one specific in central Jersey on the beaches, person bought a house, my client bought a house that was fully rehabbed, beautiful home. 6 months later, had a full loss flood. She's out front of her home talking to the neighbors, and the neighbor said, your home that was rehabbed because of a flood. And this is actually the third flood that has hit us in the past 3 years. The buyer, my client who lives in that house currently, had no clue about any of that. And unfortunately, the person who sold them a house was actually the realtor. The realtor who sold her the house, it was her house. Needless to say, she got sued, and it was a bad situation. But all money aside, monetary aside, from that lawsuit and everything, that my client was out of that house for 9 months when they just bought it 6 months ago. And this wasn't 6 months ago, 6 months ago. This was about 4 years ago, but she bought it 6 months beforehand. And, the money aside, like I said, yeah, she sued them, and I don't know what happened with it, because to be honest, I didn't want to be involved. But imagine buying something, living in there for 6 months. You're super happy. You got a new home and it floods. You didn't even know about it. And it flooded multiple times in that area. So, now with these disclosures, the objective is to prevent exactly what happened with my client and, give all that information of, was there ever a flood? Are you in a flood zone? Is flood insurance required? Things that a buyer needs to know. It now is required. If you are planning on selling your house, these are things that are required by law that you're going to have to fill out now.
Yeah,
Brad,
and Brad,
okay.
sorry, before we get to Brad, I just want to mention one thing. My only response is that is a Jersey requirement. So the federal government, FEMA, we have nothing to do with it. And sometimes people get this mixed up as a FEMA requirement. It is actually a decision that was made on the state level, and it only affects New Jersey. New York happened to do the same thing. That's just more out of coincidence, but it is not a federal requirement, not a requirement throughout the country.
My question kind of ties into that. So, some of the areas does not have FEMA maps. So if you were to do a new flood
Yeah.
study, you would be in
So
a
so
zone. Mhm.
yeah, so Miriam, so all of New Jersey have maps, but if you go through the DCA site or a digital viewer, they may look like they don't because those areas have paper maps. So there are still counties in New Jersey that only have paper maps. So you can't see them online unless you go to msc.gov, FEMA.msc.gov, which is our official map depository. Listen, we say it is made publicly available, but for the layperson, I think it would be a struggle. So what I would suggest is if you know people or if you're the one who's asking, go to the local building code office or building office, ask them to show you on the map. Also, if anybody here is a buyer or is talking to a buyer, go to that community official, ask them, what do you know about this block? Because they know their communities, and I'm telling you, they can say it may not be in a flood map, but that area floods all the time, or yes, it floods, or water, pools here and there. Leverage these folks. Most of them are just there to help, but if you don't ask them, they're never going to find you. So you got to go to them, have that local knowledge.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, thanks. I was actually going to ask, I know you had mentioned in terms of this disclosure for floods and what happened to buyers, do the disclosures go back preceding when you lived in the house, or is it only during your own ownership of the house? Because my question is like that because we moved into our current house after Ida, so we weren't here for that major events. If we were to sell the house in the future, do we have to disclose what happened before we moved in, or no?
Well, technically, if you know about it, yes, you have to disclose it. And that's for all the disclosures. For example, you buy a house today, you sell it in a year, you got to put the roof age there if you know it, right? So if you're aware of the knowledge of it flooding and having a claim or a loss, you have to disclose that. And that's, if that went to court, and it was shown that you didn't know that information, that's not going to look good.
No, thanks.
Yeah, and Brad, that's an interesting question. I don't know much about the flood disclosure law. I think the Department of Community Affairs, New Jersey DCA, they have a website. I'm assuming they have an FAQ because that is a good question. You just moved in. What are you supposed to know, right? You don't know what's happened since 1995 or 2000. And to Tyler's point, I'm only speculating here. But the reason why there is no central database of all flood insurance claims, because FEMA protects personal information like you would never believe. I mean, like, just for me to share it with like the guy sitting next to me, I think I have to like password protect it and get a security check or something. So we don't give out that information. But you as a homeowner, but we'll give you as a property owner, we can give you a history of all the flood claims that we have a record of. You just have to kind of, you have to fill out a form. You got to get your signature notarized to say that you are actually the owner of the property, and then we would give you that information. But again, I don't know that much about that New Jersey disclosure law. DCA, I think, is the right state agency that is responsible for it. So that is a very good question. Okay, anyone else? Chief, do you have a question for us, Chief?
My house does flood, but I'll save that for another day.
Yeah.
No, I want to thank Thomas and Tyler really for their time tonight and their expertise. We appreciate what you do for our township, the residents, and also for everything you do for Region 2 and the state of New Jersey. If no one else has any questions, this will be available on the township website. We're saving this video for others to view at other time. If some important questions you have that you weren't able to attend tonight, you could forward them to OEM and we could channel them to either Tyler or Thomas. And if they have time, we could probably respond to that. No guarantees, but we will try our best to get you an answer. If no one else has any questions, then we'll just we'll end the session. And again, thanks to everybody that jumped on tonight.